Thank you, thank you. So yeah, it's part 7 of 8. So end in the year, and then one more to go next year. So today we'll talk about a topic that everyone has to cover in identity governance is managing employees. So real quick, what we're going to cover is more towards the traditional lines of what we hear for identity governance solutions. So the joiner, mover, leaver processes for onboarding employees. So when someone gets hired, when someone changes jobs, they get promoted, they move to a new department, they might have a long-term or short-term leave of absence. And we can talk about some of the different types of leaves of absence. One of the newest ones I've heard with a customer is actually a legal leave where someone might be going under court proceedings. So that's a fun new one we added recently. And then scheduled leavers and emergency terminations. So we'll walk through some of the different ways to address those issues and topics. I did want to point out a fact from the SailPoint Market Pulse survey last year, almost 2 years ago at this point, but 1 in 3 IT leaders spends 50% of their time on administrative identity tasks. And that's either getting access for their employees or contractors, approving access for their employees or contractors, or a lot of times themselves, they are the administrators of the systems, adding, updating, deleting accounts as people roll on and roll off. As you can imagine, right, that's people who should be spending most of their time leading our organizations and helping drive what's next rather than doing simple create updates and deletes and approvals. So, and let's also add that they're probably some of the higher paid individuals in an organization as well. Really, if we can implement some processes to help lessen that burden, imagine how much more we could actually enable them to do. So with that, Matt Topper, as I said, this is stage 7 of 8 here, so most of you know me well at this point. So we'll just pass right on through. So setting the foundation for this presentation, you've got one chance to make a first impression, right? I think we've all joined organizations where it takes weeks or even months to get access to all of the systems we need. And really, that's not good enough anymore, right? We want to be able to have a good experience for our people when they come on board. And now that everyone's working, or many of us are working from home, I won't say everyone, but many of us working from home, the locations people are working from is diversifying. We're not physically limited to offices or privileged access cards to get us into buildings. A lot of times these employees might never walk into a corporate building anymore. So our solutions to these problems need to increase and change as well. And then another fact down here, 67% of organizations surveyed can't be sure whether an employee still had access to corporate resources after they left. And I don't think the government's any better in this area, right? A lot of times, we just saw the IG report come out last month with the GSA, 15,000 contractors still had access to the systems and they couldn't be linked to any active contracts. I think if we dug into that and looked at employees too, we'd probably see much of the same. Just 2 facts in these slides that really, if we're trying to talk to our management and talk about the business value that this will bring and the risk reduction it will bring, right, those are the things you can bring up very, very quickly from authoritative sources that say, hey, here's some real cost savings that we can provide for the organizations and or great risk reduction. So, right, onboarding in many cases is pretty simple at the end of the day, right? I will say in most cases a lot less complex than the contractor onboarding that we talked about 2 sessions ago, or that might have been 3 at this point. But right, most of the time a employee has a start date set, and we know that more than a day or two in advance. Their security processing, in-processing is done ahead of time. We know when they're going to show up on the first day, so we can get their accounts provisioned at midnight beforehand. If we're doing username and password, we can send that over to their manager or the approved point of contact for the organization, or set it for the help desk for that day, turn it on just in time. We can say ahead of time, hey, we need to send a message over to the help desk, or automatically send a message into a ServiceNow queue to acquire GFE, assign them a physical location within the organization. And their manager is pretty well set inside of the HR system. Sometimes we have little escapes that say, hey, you might have set the manager, but we actually know inside of identity that they don't work here anymore, right? So we might have some callbacks there, but in general, employee onboarding is pretty simple. Where it starts to get a little complex is under provisioning and activate here, right? A lot of the organizations, everyone's going to get email, everyone's going to get VPN access, everyone's going to get mail access, but based on your role, are you part of HR? Are you part of finance? Those are what we consider birthright applications based on your department or what part of the organization you serve. So those are some of the things you would start looking at after you get those core email, Active Directory accounts, VPN accounts set up and rolling. So we talked about onboarding applications in the last session, so if you want to go back and look at that, listen to some of the approaches for that, feel free. So, and then, right, sometimes determining a manager can get a little complex. What we like to do is build in a nomination of the person, right, if the manager has left, right, and inside of the system we notice it, we're going to tell the HR team that, hey, here's all the people without assigned managers. A lot of times if a person's in a department, we know who the manager of that department or division is that their peers are assigned to. So if their peers come in and say, oh, our manager's not assigned for the time being, it's the boss's boss until they assign a new person, we let them nominate it. And then if the nominated manager takes that role on and approves it, they go ahead and approves that request to become the manager. They go ahead and become the manager of all the people in the organization. So some ways to help grease those skids. And then once the new manager is truly assigned from the HR system, we just remap everybody in real time. So that's what we're showing here is, right, some of those ways you can introduce process fixes and assistance as part of the program. So employee transfer. This is one of the ones that we like to think we've got a bit of a novel approach on that most other organizations haven't implemented yet, but has worked very, very well, right? Especially for employees. When you move between organizations, there's that period of time that you are doing two jobs at the same time, right? You've still got duties of your old job, you've got duties of your new job, and you really it takes some time to get rid of those things, and the two managers kind of have to come to an agreement, and we help facilitate this here. So if we do see an employee transfer come in, right, a lot of times we will know a start date for that transfer, who their new manager for that transfer is, because it shows what organization they're moving into. We'll notify the new manager of the transfer. Depending on the organization, that's either a week or two ahead of time or the day of. We will go ahead and also notify the previous manager that that transfer is happening. You'd be amazed how many times accidentally people get moved or keyed into the HR systems that aren't really moving, or how many, actually at a customer yesterday, there were 12 active Michael A. Foxes within the organization. So how easy would it be to pick the wrong Michael Fox? So some things that you might think about building in, right? Tell the old manager, hey, we're seeing a transfer here. Do you approve it, right? Do they need to turn in the equipment? Or is the equipment also going to transfer to the new organization? Some organizations right? If you're transferring from IT to maybe an HR system, they don't necessarily always have that same as powerful equipment depending on the job. So the IT team might bring that back and give new equipment out. And then, right, you might want to automatically submit those help desk tickets or submit the tickets to do the chargeback transfers automatically in your ServiceNows or whatever your ITSM systems are. And then what we do is on the transfer date, we actually set up a user recertification that kicks off. So this is what I was talking about, building that implicit contract between the managers. So when somebody changes departments, we know in the identity governance system, based on departments that they were in and the one they're moving to, what are birthright applications for you when you're a member of those departments. So we technically know on day one all of the apps that should be taken away and all of the apps that should be added. But we also know that they're going to do that dual-hatted job for a period of time. So what we do is when we kick off that recertification, we'll go ahead and ask the old manager, here's all of the applications that were part of your org that this person doesn't necessarily need access to for the new org. But we understand that there's a dual-hatted job here. So for a period of time, can you tell us how long they should maintain access to these applications? And then once they put those dates, times to rescind that stuff in, maybe it's on day one right now, let's take it all away, we're good, the transfer's set. Or, hey, I need them for about 2 weeks. So let them put that 2 week in time. And then the certification gets routed back to the new manager, and the new manager can look at it and go, okay, yeah, now both of us are set. It's going to be about a 2 week transfer period, and then I'll have them 100% on my team from there on out. And then after those 2 weeks, we'll take away the access to those old applications that they no longer need access to automatically. Right? That's one of the jokes constantly in identity governance is the people who have been with the organization the longest have the most amount of access. And sadly, a lot of times when new employees come into the organization, they say make them look like that person who's been here forever. So we're perpetuating really, really bad habits by quote-unquote cloning users. And by doing some of this recertification on transfer, we mitigate some of those risks that build up with people's accounts over time. Also with that, I think I've mentioned a little bit, attribute-based access control that gets baked into this. So your department, your organization you're supporting, those are attributes. And based on those attribute changes, you might get access to specific applications automatically, right? Are you now being transferred into the HR department and you have a manager title? Well, does that mean you're automatically an HR liaison based on your job code, based on the organization you're in, the department you're in, right? We can automatically assign you access to those applications. Similarly, if you're being read into a new program, if you're working with security clearance stuff, right? You can go ahead and automatically add them to those new applications or automatically add them to those data protection groups based on the attributes they've gained. Those can also be mapped to policies that might say you might have to have A, B, and C, and D, E, and F training before you get access to this. But as soon as you meet those qualifications, we'll automatically add you to those groups, add you to those entitlements, add you to those applications, and if any of those things drop, take them away. So really have a strong ability to push in attribute-based access control across the board, but especially in employees where some of those moves and some of those accesses are more predictable based on the organizations they serve. So another thing we like to bake in is a leave of absence. A lot of times, right, if you're heading out on a medical leave of some sort, if you're taking a sabbatical, if you're going off to another organization on loan for a little while, if you're part of a special program, we see that a lot, especially with the cybersecurity training that goes on lately, right? You might be detailed over to another organization for a year, 2 years. But with that, you probably want to turn off the person's VPN access. You probably, it's debatable whether you want to turn them off on email, especially if there's a webmail client. But anything like privileged access anything internal once you're within the VPN, you can probably suspend and disable those accounts because they're not supposed to be doing their job. You might want to have them converse through email, just catch up on things. When they're coming back, get them started, but right, you want to turn those things off, and those are triggers you also want to be able to give to your SOC and NOC teams. We'll talk about this a little bit more in next month's presentation, but right, all of those triggers, right, to make your organization more security aware are things you want to bake in. If somebody's trying to bang against the VPN as that person's account while they're on long-term leave, guess what? That's a high chance of an account takeover or something going on that they shouldn't be doing. Those are great indicators to tell your NOC and SOC teams. And then, right, because the accounts are disabled, you're mitigating that risk to your organization at the same time as well. Right? We're disabling accounts, we're not deleting them. So as soon as they come back from leave, all of those things can be turned on very, very quickly. And I guess I will also show, right, a lot of times that's set as a HR status that comes in as a leave of absence from the HR system. It can also be either manager-driven or specific HR liaison group-driven within the SailPoint application. If you don't have those capabilities baked into your HR, adding those simple forms are very, very simple until you might get a more mature process from your HR system in the future. So just thought I'd add that in real quick. So scheduled leaver, right? If somebody, I always like to say, won the lotto or is heading off to their retirement, right? We know ahead of time when those people are going to be separating from the organization, right? It's important to make sure that they're able to do their jobs on their last days. I see a lot of mistakes happen in implementations of these systems where, oh, it's scheduled leaver day, let's turn them off at 6 o'clock in the morning. Well, it's their last day. We need to sign papers. We need to finish up our last email because we all know these transitions rarely are clean and buttoned up easy on the last day for people, right? And you don't want to be turning off at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, right? Sometimes those things push. You might want to give the manager an ability to say, hey, I know this is the day. By default, the termination is 6 o'clock, but give the manager an option to override that and say, I need to push them for another 2 hours to 8 o'clock, right? And we also have to take into people's time zones, so work locations and all that into those timings. So that's all part of the simple boxes at the top that we see that need to be baked into the system. But still, right, if we know that there's a scheduled leaver date, we might take a default time. We might ask the manager to confirm that time, or we might give them an ability to go in and schedule it themselves and say, hey, we know the day, you tell us the time, Mr. or Miss Manager or HR liaison for the group. A lot of organizations we work with, there's a dedicated HR liaison for the group or for the organization, the department that gets assigned to some of these tasks. So that's why you might see that on the left-hand side there. And then we wait for that separation date and time and execute the provision, deactivate, and terminate, right? And in this case, it truly is a terminate access. We may be deleting accounts or moving them into a specific OU for a holding pattern for 30, 60, 90 days in case they come back in another role, or it's a mistake in the system from, hopefully we catch it before they actually turn off, but we need to turn them back on very quickly. We tend to build those escapes into the systems as well because we know data is not perfect, right? But we turn this off, we send the emails out, we send the emails over to physical security saying that this person has left the organization. If they need to manually turn off a PIV or CAC card, manually right, disable building access. A lot of times those systems aren't API driven at this point. They're getting better, right? But there's still some manual tasks that need to go there. Maybe you send the email off to the IT asset teams to collect the laptops from the person's desk or collect them from the manager or schedule a time for that collection, right? All of those type of things can be driven off of this scheduled leaver process. So, and then also the other thing that you want to look at building into the system is reassigning the subordinates. we don't always have from an HR system who the new manager is. So you might build a process internally that says automatically it becomes the manager's manager until somebody new is nominated and assigned inside of HR, right? We don't want people's requests, approvals, certifications, accesses, if they're a contracting officer as well, right? Right, all of those things, if they get stuck in the system, it's just frustrating and slows down business. So look internally, what is your process for this? Is it something you want to be able to assign into the system? Is it something you want an employee to be able to nominate their manager, new quote unquote new manager or temporary manager, and have that person approve? Or do you really just want to wait until the HR system is updated? I will say a lot of times those HR systems aren't necessarily updated in near real time, or even in many cases more than once a week once they make it into data warehouses that we pull the data from. So you probably want to think about building something like this reassigned subordinate process in. And then from there, right, once the authoritative source comes in with who the new manager is, once that new hire is made and the people get reassigned inside of the HR side, that just flows into the systems and these overrides get cleared out and everything moves on. So, and then next time we will talk about the emergency termination process, right? A lot of times we're not always lucky enough to be able to have a scheduled leaver date and need to terminate somebody immediately. Different reasons for that in different cases, but we can't wait for even 24 hours to turn off the person's account, right? They're being walked out the door right now, and we need to disable their access so they can't get in their car or jump on their phone and log back into the systems and do damage. So how we build in emergency termination, how we add that to the system that can be kicked off by a manager, kicked off by a physical security person, an HR person, or even through SOAR actions if we see some lateral movement that our SOC and NOC team can automatically disable. And in some cases, I've seen even terminate accounts. So we will dig into more of that next month. So with that, I will open up for questions. If anybody has any, while we're waiting for those to come in, I will say our next topic is enabling user behavior analytics. This is honestly one of my most fun topics to talk about. We've been doing a ton of work this year in this area, really bringing the SOC, right, the SIM tools together with the identity management tools. This is one of the biggest missing pieces in the zero trust architectures that I see most organizations putting forward, is really how to build trust and trust indicators that can be used in your identity and access management systems. And conversely, pushing data back into the SOC, into the SIM tools, to allow our analysts to have better insight into the business side of things so that when they are having to execute playbooks and do investigations, they know what these people are supposed to be doing on a daily basis. So really, really exciting stuff. Gartner said by 2022, 60% of organizations will be using user and entity behavior analytics as part of their identity and access management solutions. And I will say in the federal space, I think we're behind on that. So really good conversation I'm looking forward to next time. So questions here. We do have a question on how we bring authoritative sources in. Is it always one? To be honest, in most cases, no. Especially in federal, we see a lot of times when the payroll system is actually updated before the HR system. So that's something to ask yourselves about as you're moving forward. Right? We tend to think of HR as the authoritative source for joiner, mover, leaver type information, but there are outside systems like the payroll systems that you might look for additional information from. So definitely think about those different things as you try and take them into account. I know that was something that was seen quite often at DHS headquarters. So yeah, definitely a good question there. But other than that, I think that covers everything for this session. So without any questions or any more questions, I'll turn it back.